story we'll certainly be following for the rest of tonight's program. Meanwhile, today, Pieter van Tonder was expected to be sentenced in the Western Cape High Court after pleading guilty to the murder of his ex-girlfriend's one-year-old Asheeqah Scott. The court last heard how Scott's body was tossed, burnt and beaten until she died. According to reports, the 37-year-old admitted to smoking Mandrax on the day that he killed her and was frustrated that her mother took too long to collect her baby. Close to 70 children have been murdered in the Western Cape this year. According to a research project run by the University of Cape Town, the first national study into child murders in South Africa shows that every 3 days a child is killed due to abuse and neglect. The child murder rate for South Africa is more than double the global average, with 969 child murders recorded in the 2014-2015 year. Now, joining us in studio to talk a little bit more about this disturbing story is Clinical Psychologist Louise Bolton. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter.
So this is quite shocking, and you know, I mean, when you read statistics about double the global average child murders, is it something that's increasing that you've noticed? Is it something peculiar to, I don't know, some psychological process in South Africa?
In South Africa, we seem to have a high tolerance for violence and crime. Also, we have a huge population that has witnessed violence and crime from a young age. Lots of South African citizens grew up in times of huge poverty, still struggle with poverty. And when one goes and you look at the research behind child abuse, then there's a huge correlation between poverty, socioeconomic class, and child abuse. But of course, that in itself is not enough. People will not abuse children because they are poor and because they did not finish school. So you need more elements than that. So there tends to also be a psychological angle. A person that struggles with anger, that may have a substance abuse problem, that has very low control over impulsivity. So low behavioral control, impulsivity, maybe in a moment where a person gets anger and they cannot direct this anger appropriately. They act out impulsively, they hurt a child, especially when there's substance abuse involved, and the regret only comes later.
Do they target the child, or is it that the child is the person who's closest to them at the time of their impulsivity?
Yes, the child is the closest.
Okay.
Such as the story that you just mentioned, often it actually happens when the child is not the biological child of the perpetrator. Sometimes it is the biological child of the perpetrator, but those things make the child more at risk, as is behaviors that a person that's struggling with impulsivity and anger might find irritating or annoying. Normal child behaviors, maybe ADHD-like characteristic, a child that's hyperactive, maybe not having a knowledge of what normal child developmental phases are, and then having expectations of a child to listen, to follow instructions that they're not capable of following yet, and then feeling like this person is defying them. And because they're under that level of stress, they then get more angry than they should, and they react in completely inappropriate ways.
So, you know, often the conversation of pedophiles comes up, and this kind of thing that if you were abused as a child, then, you know, you may go through processes, if there's no intervention and there's no help, that you may end up becoming a perpetrator yourself. Violence against children, could that be as a result of violence that was visited upon the perpetrators as they were children?
Absolutely. It is very commonly found in the research that perpetrators of violence against children were themselves victims of violence within their own homes. Yes, it's quite common.
How do we break that cycle? Because the child that we're feeling sorry for today we're going to be, vilifying them in 20, 30 years' time because they weren't helped. How do we stop that? Because they're now a victim once, and some might be saying a victim again because they're only acting out what they suffered.
And for this very reason, it is so good that in South Africa greater awareness seems to prevail these days, that it's being reported on. We really need to have systems in place that allows for the removal of children when it's necessary, and to make it easy for the parent that's witnessing what's going on to feel comfortable to report what's going on and to extract their children from the situation. In those cases, social development can assist the child, and steps can be taken in terms of counseling and, kind of managing the damaging effects that the child would have already endured.
What kind of behavior is there in a child? So, woman is dating a guy, woman is at work and doesn't realize that the daughter or son is being abused one way or another. What signs should parents be looking for in the behavior of a child that might indicate that this child is at risk?
So one might find that a child would have bruises, burns, physical symptoms that you cannot explain. One could also find phenomena that was not there before, like bedwetting, low self-confidence, a child becoming more emotional, crying more often, becoming more clingy. So if you see a significant change in your child's behavior, it is important to notice, to take notice and to have a conversation with them, to make sure that your child is also comfortable in knowing that they can communicate with you what is going on.
Because I guess it must be really difficult for them, because there's probably threats that go with the violence that don't tell your mom, and they believe that it will get worse.
Yes, very often there are threats, and therefore it's a good thing to have these conversations with your children in advance, so that they know they can speak to you when something happens, and that you will then protect them. They will be safe.
Sometimes you hear of the mother of the child that's being abused by a boyfriend, knowing that it's going on, and they do nothing. Why is it that they seem powerless? What happens? Is it that they feel threatened, or do they love this man even more than their own child? What is that dynamic?
It is a very concerning phenomenon. I agree with that. And such a parent must also realize that they also need to take accountability for that which they are turning a blind eye to. So sometimes they do feel trapped, especially if financial circumstances keep them within a situation where they feel like, I don't know where to go, I don't know how I'm going to feed my child, and then they might actually try and manage the situation and speak to this person and try and intervene when there is some kind of abuse, which is why we really need the systems in place where a mother or a father can feel like, I know where to go if I need to leave the situation.
What do we need to do as a society to turn this tide of tolerance to violence, and we hear this story and then it's gone tomorrow? What do we do? How do we change society's psyche? Is there a way?
There is a way, and it will require lots of education. So creating awareness, having educational programs within communities where we know that problems are rife, educating people around child rearing, parenting skills, appropriate discipline, also around the effects that abuse can have on children, so that there's more of an empathy, more of a compassion for the damage that's being done. People need to have more insight into the damage that this is doing.
Louise, thanks very much indeed for coming through and giving us some insights on this scourge, this really terrible, terrible situation. Thank you so much indeed.
It's a pleasure, Peter. Thank you.